Good afternoon. This is Gary Sly, and that's the Legacy of Handmade Objects. It's Monday, May the 13th. It's the day after Mother's Day, so I want to start off by just taking a moment to wish Happy Mother's Day the day after to all those out there who celebrate Mother's Day. I'm especially conscious of those who fill in as moms in so many different situations, the aunts, the grandmothers, the special friends in our families. I gave you a little view of the fireworks display at Disney World. That's where I spent the weekend. I celebrated my birthday last Thursday and decided to fulfill a childhood dream. I've always wanted to stay at the Polynesian Resort. I'm a big Disney fan. My family and I drove down to Florida from Virginia in 1972, the second year that the Magic Kingdom was open. And every time I go there, I'm kind of taken back to the nostalgia of that first trip and the many, many times that I've been there since. And if you want to see me happy, send me to Disney World. That's a good way to make me happy. But I'm also happy stitching and talking about all the wonderful things that are related to this wonderful craft that we have. I did get a couple really cool books that I'll talk about soon. There's a new book by Claire Hunter, who's one of my all-time favorite authors, where she talks about Mary Queen of Scots. And I got a wonderful cookbook from a 5-generation African-American family in the South that I'm eager, both of those books I'm eager to look at and read and maybe talk to you guys about. A number of weeks back, I took a trip to the subcontinent of India and talked to you about some of the religious traditions there and began the discussion of how important stitching and fiber arts can be in terms of religious practice. I want to pick up on that again today. We're going to take a trip to the Far East today, to China and Japan. But before we lift off, I wanted to just say a little bit more about this whole concept of stitching as religious practice. There's no question, and there have been studies and data all over the place that talk about how valuable stitching and handwork can be in terms of our health. There are actual studies, and you'd have to do some Googling to find out. I know there was a big medical study done at the Duke University Medical Center some years back. Benefits like lowering your blood pressure. Certainly there are emotional and psychological kind of benefits from being able to focus on things that we enjoy. I always emphasize when I'm talking about these kind of issues that if you pick up a craft and it frustrates you, it really drives you crazy, then that's not the right one for you, and that's not what I'm talking about. But when you find something that you love and that you can see yourself spending many hours doing, it really does have a calming, meditative effect. And I think most people who have found something like that can attest to the value of that. Well, it's appropriate then that we talk a little bit about Far Eastern religious traditions today, and I'm going to just very briefly talk about three: Taoism, Confucianism, and Shinto. And, you know, I emphasized this the first time when I started talking about living religions in the world. For me to give you a 3 to 5 minute gloss is not even almost worth talking about in terms of the breadth and the complexity and the wonderful things that are involved in these different religious traditions. But I feel like maybe it's a little bit helpful to have some context. And at the end of today's session, you'll see a few slides with some examples of stitching that's been done. Taoism, the first of the three, and probably one of the oldest continuing religious traditions anywhere in the world, comes to us from China. You will see it spelled with a T, T-A-O, or Dao is the way it's usually pronounced, with a D-A-O. Doesn't really matter. It's transliterated from Chinese, and so whatever English spelling we give to it is the one that we assign based on the sound of it. Taoism allegedly or historically was founded by a fellow named Lao Tse. It really is a pretty amazing combination of ideas. Some would say it's more of a philosophical school than a particular religious tradition, but so much of Chinese culture has a bedrock under it of Taoism. One thing you may be quite familiar with and didn't know what you were looking at is an important symbol for Taoism is the yin and the yang, the two interlocking symbols that balance perfectly. And balance is a good way to talk about Taoism. Taoism is an intentional approach to bringing balance based on what we find in nature. And it's pretty true if we stop and think about it a little bit, that if we would just let nature do what nature does, the world would be in pretty good balance. Of course, we as humans and other living creatures have a way of messing up that balance sometime. I do have a cross-stitch piece that some family members brought to me from China. I'm going to show you what the kit looks like first, because again, this might be a pretty good way of thinking about Taoism. It's a nature scene. It's bamboo with a couple little birds. You might call them lovebirds, I'm not sure, in the design. Not a terribly complex or maybe even terribly interesting design if you're used to doing lots of bright colors and all kinds of symbols. But for someone in the Taoist tradition, a design like this, even the stitching of it, but certainly the enjoying of it after it is completed, would be something that might bring a sense of calm and peace based on images from nature. And the idea of balance is real important here. You've got light and dark, you've got kind of forward and backward. I haven't stitched the second bird yet, but there's a pair of birds here. So the religious practice of Taoism is setting about in various ways. And again, as I say, my little quick 2 minutes is not enough to explain it. But the idea of Taoism is studying the way nature is balanced and then looking for ways to bring that balance into our lives. The I Ching is an important document. It goes back into ancient Chinese history, which helps you to look at the way you live your life and the actions you take and things like that. And again, seeing humans as part of the natural world and helping to bring balance. Another ancient tradition from China is that of Confucianism. Again, maybe not so much seen as a religious tradition with temples or churches or something like that, but as a very, very important foundational thought process or philosophical school as we look at Chinese culture. Confucius was likely a historical figure, and some of his writings or some of the writings that are attested to him still exist. Confucius built on Taoism, but really what he was focusing on were the relationships in human culture. The relationship between the emperor and the people of China, the relationship between a husband and wife, the relationship between parents and children. If you know anything about Chinese culture, you know that ancestors are highly revered, and that both Taoism and especially Confucianism focuses some attention on being in connection with and understanding and knowing about one's ancestors. And the ancient Chinese culture was very, very focused on this idea of reaching back and trying to continue that line of blessing and meditation and strength based on ancestors. I don't know if you call it ancestor worship. I guess it's possible that might be a way of thinking about it, but certainly a veneration of ancestors, a knowledge of ancestors. Maybe sometimes in our Western culture we've lost touch with some of that. So Taoism, Confucianism are both important kind of background ideas. If you go to China, and actually I'm very excited, I just booked a tour of China that I'm going to do next fall. October of 2025, I'm going to visit China for the first time, and maybe I'll have some updates on what I find there. But if you go to China today, of course, you know, most of China is a communist nation, and religious practices are not as popular, or maybe frowned on by some. So you wouldn't find particular places of worship that relate to Taoism and Confucianism. But if you dig deep into Chinese culture, which is very connected and goes back for thousands of years, you will see the principles of balance and attachment to nature that comes from Taoism, and a lot of discussion about the relationships between different human interactions based on Confucianism. Before the modern day, if you wanted to get a job in Chinese culture, even in the communist Chinese culture, there was a test that you had to pass, which was related to information from Confucianism. So it's a core set of principles that goes back very far in Chinese culture. Things you're most likely to see there in terms of stitching are images of Confucius, images of the Chinese language, that sort of thing. I do want to mention, and it's something probably I can take a little more time to talk about another time, is that silk, of course, originates in China. And there's a rich, rich history of the making of silk, decorating with silk. Silk is the strongest natural fiber that exists. And the Chinese discovered how to extract it from the worms that eat on the leaves there. For quite a long time, you could only buy silk in China, and they vigorously protected the secret of how it was made and how it was spun and dyed and all that. In a more modern time, of course, silk is made in other parts of the world, but the origin of silk and the wonderful use of silk in embroidery and in some of the things that we see when we think about Chinese culture really go back to that wonderful history of silk. And there's a great book called Silk. I don't have a copy of it anymore. I don't know what happened to it, but it's a wonderful history of how silk was created and the whole origin of that. Well, just very quickly, I want to leave China, hop over the ocean, or hop over the sea, it's not too far away, and go over to Japan, and just mention briefly the ancient religious culture of Japan, which is a tradition called Shinto, S-H-I-N-T-O. Much like some of the things we saw in Taoism, Shinto looks specifically at the presence of the divine, the presence of God in nature. If you're used to thinking about Japanese culture a little bit, you think about finely done gardens, but not big flashy gardens with all kinds of flowers and things like that, but very simple designs. Perhaps in the mind of the designers and in the mind of that religious tradition, based on what you might find in the natural world, but finely manicured and taken care of. Water is very important in Shinto. Purification by water is an important ritual. I mentioned that I was just in Disney World. If you've ever been to Epcot and you've walked around the World Showcase and you saw that great big red, looks like archway or gateway out in the water over on the side next to Japan, you've seen a symbol of Shinto culture. That is a torii, which is the gateway to where you would find a Shinto temple. Because all three of these Far Eastern traditions are deeply rooted in the thought processes and the connection of humanity with nature, you will find stitching examples, and you'll find art in those cultures that help you to focus on those ideas. And I've given you a few slides at the end also from Shinto. You see a representation of a Shinto temple, and you see one representation, I'm pretty sure it's in silk, of the red archway, or the torii that I was talking about. So just about as quickly as one could go through it, that's a way to talk about Far Eastern religious traditions, and again drive home this idea that whatever your religious background may be, if you enjoy handwork and if you enjoy stitching, there's probably a way to honor that and to give credence to that religious tradition. I am going to spend a good bit of time talking about it with respect to more familiar traditions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, those kind of things. We're all familiar, I suspect, with going into a church and seeing embroidered liturgical garments and altar cloths and things like that. Throughout the history of religion, as stitching and embroidery came along, it has proved to be one of the ways of honoring and giving respect to the religious traditions that it's tied to. And so that's why I wanted to take a little trip to the Far East today and just talk a little bit about those three traditions. I taught a course in world religions that I loved very much when I worked at the community college, and I'm contemplating doing a longer series, not necessarily a Flosstube, but a longer series where I break down those living religious traditions and spend a little more time talking about them. If that is something that you think you might be interested in, don't hesitate to mention it in the comments, because that's something that I'm anticipating. I love teaching that course, and I could do it. It'd probably be about 12 one-hour sessions, so it'd be a little more lengthy than what my Legacy of Handmade Objects videos are about, but it might be something that I'm thinking about. So happy Mother's Day again. Thank you for joining me on our quick little buzz to China and Japan today. Got some exciting stuff coming up as we head into the summer. There's going to be a customer contest here in the shop, so I'm looking forward to showcasing some of the wonderful things that patrons and friends bring in. Yeah, I guess that's probably where I'm going to end for today, but stay healthy, stay in the air conditioning. If you're somewhere where it's hot, watch out for tornadoes and all that ugly weather that we've been seeing in the southeast. As always, this is Gary Sly, and I thank you for joining the Legacy of Handmade Objects.